Daddy, what's 4th edition D&D? Bum, 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 dun, bum, 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 dun. 4th edition D&D. A childish question, but not a childish question. I keep trying to get away, but they keep dragging me back in. They keep dragging me up in. Never get off the goddamn boat. The horror. The horror. I left the mayonnaise outside. Something's happening here. All right, enough of the silliness. Every Tuesday, we try and review a game from the past. We've gone through my shelf, and I haven't had a chance to go to the store and pick up any new games other than that weird Andromeda 2055, which I need to relook at because I don't think I did it justice. But for some reason, 4th edition D&D sort of came up recently, and is it time to maybe revisit it? But let's paraphrase this by saying that recently somebody made a claim that the Dungeons & Dragons we're playing now is not the same as the Dungeons & Dragons we played in the 70s, which is completely accurate. I mean, at its core, Dungeons & Dragons hasn't changed. From day one to today, it's D20 plus stuff or D20 minus stuff, and then adding extra stuff. Your single units going through a grid fighting stuff. Then for some reason we started giving them silly voices and telling stories, and it became role-playing, and there was arguments and new versions and marketing and blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. Now, this individual went further to say that 0 edition through 3.5 is Gygaxian D&D, which of course could be argued that no, it isn't, because there's like 18 different versions in there, each by different authors, each who took it a different way. I mean, you have 0 edition, you have white box, you have blue box, you have red box, you have black box, you have advanced, you have expert, you have unlimited, you have, like 17, 5 to some people, a lot of versions with Blueholme, Gygax, Arnson, Hargrave, Ernie, but there's between the closing of 3.5 and white box, there is more than just Gygax D&D. But let's just, there's 0 through 3.5 is Gygax D&D, more or less. 3.5 to today is Wizards of the Coast D&D, and they're not the same beast. And that thinking, of course, comes because of 4th edition. Because from 0 to 3.5, Dungeons & Dragons was presented in a very specific way. This is Dungeons & Dragons the way it was presented from 0 to 3.5. All right, I need a different color. And then we have the way D&D has been presented since 5th edition, which there's already, 4 versions of 5th edition? So really, who knows if there's even, I don't even know. So here's 0 through 3.5, here's 5th edition. Somewhere in the middle was 4th edition. This, and this, are they completely different games? Well, this, 0 through 3.5, and 5th edition are very similar. In fact, some would say 5th edition is actually going backwards to get closer to what this was, 0 to 3.5. But there is no question that this, 4th edition, was a completely different game. Bam, 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 bam. I feel like I need some rain, and the Doors playing in the background, this is the end. Some 1960s flashback music to talk about the horror that was 4th edition. 4th edition D&D was a completely different game than every other version that came before it and every other version that came after it. It was the separation between what we called Gygaxian, Grokenard, Dungeons & Dragons, and the beginning of the post-Forge, player advocacy, post-Critical Role Dungeons & Dragons. Somewhere between 3 and 5 was 4. Now, on paper, if you take everything else away from it and just look at the way 4th edition is written, the rules, it's okay. It's not great. It's not, it's different. I mean, the skill system has changed. They added the battlefield control rules. They added some new classes. Some other things changed. The action economy was written differently. Some would say it's changed. Others would say they didn't change it. They just wrote what we were already doing differently. Action, encounter, daily. It was like we were kind of doing that anyways with our special abilities. They just rewrote it. There are good ideas in the rule set. There are bad ideas in the rule set. There are changes they made that I think are great. There are changes they made I thought was stupid, but I'm going to say that about every edition and every game. There's things I'm going to agree with 5th edition. There's things I agree with 3rd. Then there's other things I'm like, this is stupid. So on paper, 4th edition is fine. It's no better or worse than any other role-playing system. Are there better games that came out at that point in time? Yes, of course. Are there worse games that came out at that point in time? Yes, of course. Is 4th edition the system a horrible system? No, it's just meh. It's there. It's whatever it is. It had good ideas. It had bad ideas. But the 4th edition wars, and the reason why there is this huge gap, is not how they changed the system. I mean, there was some very abrupt changes. But that's not the problem, and that's not why 4th edition is considered this separate entity, and that's not why the 4th edition wars began. The system is fine. We're just going to leave that hanging out there. The 4th edition mechanics is fine. It's floating over here. That said, here's where the war starts. Every single solitary choice the marketing team behind 4th edition made from day one to the day they closed it was completely and utterly bass-ackwards wrong and stupid. Every single solitary choice they made in regards to 4th edition and how it was presented to game store owners and to the public, completely and utterly stupid. And the way they introduced the system was stupid. And that's what upset people. Not the system, the way you went about it. I'm sure had things been done differently, it probably would have been okay. But it wasn't. Instead of a gradual, gentle, upward slope of getting people accustomed to the fact that we're changing things again, it was a violent, hostile, aggressive, stupid way of doing it. You could look at this from a marketing point of view and just go, every single solitary choice you made was wrong and stupid and self-destructive. It's almost like they didn't want 4th edition to succeed. And who knows? Maybe they didn't. Because we don't know the whole story. Everybody has their own story of how 4th edition happened. But we don't actually know what happened in the boardrooms of Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast and was involved with the various writers at the time. But if you look at it, hindsight 2020, every choice they made was wrong. And now you kind of look at it and go, did they want it to fail? Because some of these choices are just blatantly stupid. And anybody in marketing who knows how to sell anything would go, wow, that's just dumb. Why are you doing that? It's almost like you want your product to fail. And there is some validity to that statement because there are examples throughout history of people who made products with the intention of the product to fail because inevitably they would make more money from their product failing than they would have made from the product succeeding. So that there is a school of financial thought behind that. So who knows? Now, what the powers that be should have done, and I think everybody agrees This is what they should have done. Because we know who the 4th edition target audience is. Video game players. Or at least that's what they thought. Wizards of the Coast has just acquired recently the rights to Ebberon from Keith Baker. And we know there's been hemming and hawing for a long time to do a Magic the Gathering role-playing game. What they should have done is either introduced Ebberon the role-playing game using the system that would be 4th edition, or introduced a Magic the Gathering role-playing game using the 4th edition system. It should not have been called 4th edition D&D. It should have been called Ebberon the role-playing game. Here's the system. Because the OGL already existed, so they could introduce other games that use the OGL D20 mechanics and not call them D&D. So Wizards of the Coast, or some subsidiary Wizards of the Coast, should have released Ebberon the role-playing game using the system we are now familiar with as 4th edition D&D. They should have kept that around for, a year. Here's Ebberon the role-playing game. It's floating around for a year. Or here's Magic the Gathering, the role-playing game. It's floating around for a year. We're going to do a year, 2 years of just, 3rd edition, 3.5 sitting at the shelf. We've got plenty of independent people supporting it. We've got Pathfinder. We don't need to support it. Pathfinder is a completely separate story. And then, after that time passed, they should have said, okay, you guys have seen this system for a year or so. You've played it. You've commented on it. What do you think? Do you like the system? Because if you like the system, we're going to make that system 4th edition D&D. And if you don't like that system, then we'll keep it the way it is, and we'll just make something else 4th edition D&D. We're going to do a 4th edition D&D. We have to remain competitive, but you've had a chance to test out this system. What do you think? And if everybody went, yeah, this is a great system, I love it. Ebberon, the role-playing game, is a great game. Then they would have been like, okay, we're going to do D&D 4th edition using the Ebberon, the role-playing game system. And people have been like, okay, sure, yeah. There's still the people who didn't like it, but whatever. There's people who don't like 5th. That's what they should have done. But they didn't. And that is why we have the 4th edition. That is why 4th edition has such hate, plus many of other reasons. That would be a whole separate vlog, but I want to keep this short. I've already gone way too long. But addressing the idea that 1st through 3rd is Gygax D&D, or one style of D&D, and 3.5-ish, late 3.5 to today, is Wizards of the Coast D20. Mostly that idea exists because of 4th edition. 4th edition was such an alien idea to the way we saw 1st through 3 and the way we're seeing 5. 5, if anything, is going backwards towards 5th, which means 6 might even go further backwards towards the OSR and towards the Gygaxian thinking of 0 through 3.5. But then you have this weird, ugly, bizarre, completely different thing in the middle, sandwiched between the two, that is just so alien and so different, and was advertised, and just every possible thing that could have been done was completely and utterly wrong. That's where that thinking comes from. And that's why we had the 4th edition roles. And that's why people are still angry about 4th edition. And that's why part of the many reasons why there's this huge gap in the player tribalism between the mentality of the 0 through 3.5 players, the OSR players, and the mentality of the post-4th, post-critical role, post-video game players, is because of 4th. 4th on its own, if you just looked at the system, is fine. If I had said, this is the Ebberon role-playing game, fine. Whatever. But they didn't. And because they did it, because of every choice Wizards of the Coast made, we have the 4th edition role wars. We have the beginning of the tribalism. We have this separation of church and state, of Gygaxian players and critical role players and whatever you want, post-Forge. Gygaxian players and post-Forge players, because the Forge happened around 4th. So we're going to say Gygaxian players, Forge players. Just that difference of, perceived difference of mentality. And it's all because of the way 4th edition was handled.
And now, hindsight being 2020, you almost think that they intended 4th edition to fail, because let's face it, they abandoned it after what, like 3 years? Anyways, I'm the OG GM, and this has been your history flashback as we take a look at the utter disaster of 4th edition D&D and what 4th edition D&D could have been. Something's happening here. What it is isn't exactly clear.
4th edition. I can't believe you dragged me back to 4th edition. The horror.